Hello, everybody. I'm Emma Fryer from CyrusOne. I'm Public Policy Director, Europe. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our webinar, Can the Internet Heat Our Communities? The Potential for Heat Reuse in Europe. Very hot topic at the moment. This is a joint event involving EUDCA, CISPE, the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact, and it's also run under the auspices, or the broader auspices, of the EU Sustainable Energy Week activities. I'm so absolutely delighted to see you here. I'll just quickly run through the agenda so you know what we're starting from. The webinar, the objective of the webinar is to discuss the opportunities and challenges for utilising waste heat from data centres, a non-trivial pursuit. Data centre waste heat is a renewable source of heat. It's a good alternative to fossil fuels, which can contribute to a sustainable heating supply in Europe and support the heating sector in achieving the EU's decarbonisation goals. But what we're trying to find out is the actual potential of data centre waste heat and the requirements for making it available. We're going to hear views from a range of stakeholders, heating providers, data centre operator, consultants, non-profit sectors, and the European Commission. And the webinar is going to investigate practical challenges and illustrate potential solutions for the uptake of heat from data centres through concrete examples of successful multi-stakeholder collaborations. We're going to start off with a 5-minute interactive survey. Then we will have 3 very short case study presentations, followed by a moderated debate. We'll finish up with the Q&A, and please do submit questions through the Zoom chat. And if you're not speaking, probably best practice to turn off mics. But before we go on to that, I'd really like to introduce our fantastic panel of speakers. I shall start with Nikolaos Kontinakis, who's Policy Officer, European Commission at DG ENER. So Nikolaos works for the Energy Efficiency Unit of the European Commission's Directorate for Energy. More specifically, he's the person responsible for the implementation of Article 12 of the EED on data centres, something that will strike fear into many hearts in the industry. And that includes the delegated regulation, the preparatory studies, and engagement with stakeholders. So Nikolaos is an extremely busy man. Secondly, Dr. Bela Waldhauser from Telehouse. He is the Chief Executive Officer at Telehouse Deutschland. He's our operator representative. He's been responsible for the operational business of KDDI and Telehouse in Germany since 2014. He's also a board member of the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact and a co-chair of the Pact's Circular Energy Working Group, so he has a specific interest. We'll be hearing from Dr. Bela later, who'll be presenting a really great heat reuse case study. We have Pauline Lucas, who's Policy Director for Euroheat and Power. Pauline, as Policy Director there, leads advocacy efforts on the EU stage to support the deployment of decarbonised district heating and cooling networks. So again, someone with a lot to do, a lot of heavy lifting going on there. Marco Bolci is joining us. He's Executive Director of Ernst & Young. He focuses on space, digital and transport. He's coordinated and led multiple projects for key EU institutions and agencies, as well as European and global associations and private clients. Marco and his team have been working on a major study of opportunities for integrating data centres more fully into the energy system, and we're going to hear from him later too. Then Felix Kriedemann, project manager at ResCube. He is focusing on renovations and heating and cooling. He's got a background in EU public affairs, having worked in trade associations for transport and renewable energy, as well as the European Parliament. Felix is currently working on citizen-led renovations and community heating and cooling to democratise the EU's energy system in close collaboration with citizen energy cooperatives. We're going to hear from Felix later about some of the initiatives he's been involved with. So that's our panelists. I think the next thing we're going to do is to, yes, here we go, launch our online survey. So please, could you use your Q&A button and join the survey? And I will read you the questions. I'll just scroll down to them because they're not appearing.
So just to chip in, you can join the survey. We'll launch it in a few seconds. You can do so either by using the code you see on screen by going to slido.com, or you can scan the QR code and we will go through the 3 questions.
Thank you. And I will read you the questions. So the first question is, what topics or issues do you think of when you hear about data center heat reuse? Oh, it's popped up for me now. So this is your initial thoughts. which is great. We'll give it a few more seconds, but we're getting some very interesting results there, which suggests to me that this is, yes, a non-trivial exercise. Okay, do any of our speakers want to chip in with their thoughts on the words that are coming up before we move to the other two questions?
I can. Very happy to see that the biggest word is district heating. This is really, I mean, district heating or infrastructure question. I think if we want to reuse the heat at scale, the infrastructure is a big question. So happy to see that it's stating the obvious.
Excellent, brilliant. Thank you for that. Right, shall we move on to the next question, which is, in your opinion, which of the following constitutes the biggest challenge for the uptake of data center heat reuse? And we've already seen some of these come up in the previous question, I think. So we'll give you a minute to look at these. Okay, I think that's just about, it seems to have settled out there. Would anyone else like to comment? But that's, I think, a very interesting finding.
Yeah, Emma, this is exactly what we are focusing on in our working group in the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, that we have so much waste heat, which we would like to provide to households, offices, whatsoever, but there's not enough infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to the discussion with Pauline and the others. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Shall we move on to the third question? That should pop up in a second. Here we are. In your opinion, which of the following actions is the most important to increase the uptake of heat from data centers? We've got 4 options here. Right, that seems to be settling out firmly on schemes and incentives. Would any of our speakers like to comment on those results? I think the interesting thing there is I think there's a recognition that this is a non-trivial activity, actually getting these things off the ground, and that multiple stakeholders have to be involved. So we'll take that away. But yes, that's definitely looking firmly at it needs an incentive. This is something that needs a carrot rather than a stick by the sound of it. Okay, I think it's probably time for us to do our three sort of quick fire presentations. We're going to start off with Marco Bolci. He's going to do a presentation, a very short presentation on the EU-funded study on data center and energy systems synergies, DCESS for short. Marco and his team have been working at EY on the 18-month study that was commissioned by DG Connect on data center and energy system integration. You may remember that being launched about 18 months ago, in fact. In this webinar, and actually for the first time to the public, so you've heard it here first, Mr. Bolci will present the final results of the study with a very specific focus on the challenges and policy recommendations for data center heat reuse. So Marco, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I will actually try to keep the presentation short and actually indeed like keep it like focused. And the presentation will actually be and as you were mentioning, like the focus has been a project for DG Connect on optimizing synergies between data centers and the energy system. I will actually be providing an all-around view about the outcomes of the study, taking into account that EY has been taking a coordinating role, but in partnership with other partners, AIT covering the technical part, Border Step Institute, and RP Legal and Tax to cover like the legal implications. So I'm not a technician, I'm not nor an engineer, but I hope I can basically bring an overview of the study for you. So if we can go indeed to the next slide, the study was commissioned by DG Connect to explore the optimization of synergies between data centers and the energy system. And the ultimate goal is to indeed like think about how energy efficient and climate neutral data centers can be achieved in line with the Green Deal and Digital Decade objectives. The study has actually been based on a series of phases which are connected to the objectives, starting with a comprehensive mapping of the technical landscape to try to understand what are the new potential approaches for enhancing energy efficiency and how those approaches can be integrated into energy and water systems. The second part of the study has been focusing on drivers, obstacles, as well as opportunities for integration of data centers into energy systems. And following that, we have actually been taking a more pragmatic, let's say, and concrete look into first integration strategies employed by other energy and emission intensive sectors to take lessons learned, and then we've been taking a look to case studies that have been showcasing successful integration of data centers into the energy system. And the last step was the development of policy recommendations based on the findings. I think that like on this slide basically is actually just summarizing like the steps. So for the sake of timekeeping, we could actually like go to the next one. And the next one indeed like focuses on the summary of the technological research and assessment. So when it comes to heat reuse, I will actually like of course much simplify, but from the technical perspective, it is already feasible. Where the issues start to arise are like when we also look like to the economic feasibility, and when it comes to the economic feasibility, there are like a series of conditions that I'm going to develop a bit more like during the presentation, which affect significantly the economic feasibility. Some of them are connected to the price of the energy, others are connected to the actual distance of the heat produced from the district in which like it does need to be utilized. From the perspective of the technical, let's say, standpoint, we've also been looking also like to innovation and the emerging type of systems and how they can actually positively impact the feasibility of heat reuse, like thanks to greater use, for example, of heat pumps and other innovation that I'm going to discuss like a little bit later in the presentation. If we move on to the next slide, as part of the technical assessment, we have also been taking a look to the role that the interdependencies between the core sectors that are involved into heat reuse actually do have, including like water, electricity, and heat, to take into account trade-offs and interdependencies. And I will will actually like maybe elaborate a little bit more on one example. One example is actually like water availability and scarcity, connected to the fact that water is a critical resource like for the most effective cooling systems, but it is also a critical resource in the production of several renewable energy sources. So in a sense, like the heat reuse does need like to cope with the water availability sometimes as a trade-off between different elements and so on and so forth. Like the study has been assessing interdependencies between like all the three elements. I would maybe jump to the next slide to provide like basically like this quick helicopter view about like the outcomes of the study. Like next to this, the study has actually been focusing on identifying and looking to energy and emission intensive sectors, and take a look now, you can maybe stay on the previous slide, and how the sectors address the issue of integrating data centers in the energy and water grids, which has been allowing for the identification of best practices and lessons learned that can be transferable and replicable for data center industry. The two that we have actually like been the two major ones that are relevant like for this topic like are the usage of waste heat like via heat exchangers and heat pumps, and the use of combined heat and power plants. We have been taking a look like to the potential of those best available technologies, as well as potential trade-offs and constraint. So like when it comes to the usage of waste heat via heat exchangers and heat pumps, the potential lack of heat consumers like close enough to is a potential issue. When it comes when it comes to the combined heat and power plants, potential issues can actually be connected from the economic standpoint to the economic conveniency in connected to their use, like which is of course related to the heating demand and the electricity prices, which are inversely of course connected to the potential added value and economic case for CHP. Following this, the study has actually been moving on to cover, and maybe we can go to the next slide, case studies and concrete cases of synergies between data centers and heating networks. And we have actually been taking a look to three major, let's say, pillars for the analysis or elements. The first one has been like the integration that data centers do need to have within the heat networks, so that they can actually become key components of the wider energy ecosystem. The second topic is the possibility to actually overcome seasonal discrepancies in heat demand, which is a major challenge for heat reutilization. And the third point has actually been connected to matching waste heat with the heat demand, coordinating, which requires strategic positioning of the data centers or like innovative ways to actually transfer the heat. So going more in practice, like examples of the case studies that we've actually been focusing like for each of those dimensions are like the Stockholm data parks, like when it comes to the integration into of data centers with existing heating networks. As we've been observing that this is a very successful example of collaborative integration of data centers with the district heating networks to basically reuse waste heat, and the approach is provides valuable lessons learned for cities around the world that seek to achieve sustainable urban development. When it comes to the management of the seasonality issue, we have been taking a look as a case study at the potential best practice about the Equinix aquifer thermal energy storage, which shows that on the technical standpoint how this technology is actually reliable and environmentally friendly as well as economically viable. And this focuses on using like the system like for seasonal storage for year-round use of waste heat from data centers, and expands the potential for integration of data centers into heating system. And the last case study we would like to mention in this short presentation is from Cloud and Heat, which has been demonstrating a liquid-based cooling technology that enables IT waste heat to actually be fed directly into the heating network by customizing liquid cooling solutions into buildings or containers, so that basically excess heat can actually be stored and transferred. Beyond the case studies, like maybe if we actually go to the next slide, the final objective of the study is actually been to provide recommendations and roadmaps. A first recommendation is actually connected indeed like to heat reuse, like to address a number of challenges that have actually been identified from the technical standpoint, which include the fact that the heat produced by data centers is typically at a lower temperature than the one actually required by the heating networks, the lack of a specific and clear regulatory framework, and the need for financial incentives and grid supports. Like when it comes to the gaps, indeed, all of those actually are like significant issues, which actually do affect like basically the extent to which like reuse of heat is actually widespread in Europe. And from our study, what we actually identified is that data center, provided that the necessary infrastructure is available, would actually be interested and willing to actually transfer as much heat as possible, but like the perspective is indeed like challenged by the lack of infrastructure and like demand side aspects. The first actionable advice, like in this context, has been that to actually be able to move forward, a target would actually need to be defined for energy reuse from data centers. And throughout the study, a potentially sensible target that was actually defined in combination with the project partners would actually be a heat utilization ratio of 0.1 or 10% to be potentially achieved by 2030. And this would actually be, of course, a target that would actually require like a range of different actors to be involved. Moving on to the next slide, indeed, actually to make this possible, the two type of actions that we would actually foresee as necessary to basically like help achieving this objective is, first of all, like further research focusing like on the industry implementation of waste heat reuse to basically move on from selected best practices being available to a more widespread implementation. And then another point which I saw was indeed reflected in the survey as well is the presence of supporting schemes and incentives for heat reuse, both for data centers and heat off-takers. We move on like to the next slide, which is also the last slide of the presentation. Just to conclude, heat reuse is already a viable technology for data centers, according to our study, and it has been implemented in various facilities. Recent developments on heat reuse technologies, including for 4G and 5G systems, are actually going to increase the potentiality and the possibilities for heat reuse. In line with this, like regulatory and public authorities, I mean, taking into account like what are like limitations and constraints in heat reuse, which are connected to seasonality, like the temperature level and the distance between the production and the use of the heat, regulatory authorities can actually like play a role, and they can play a role at I would say like a wider level by establishing policies and guidelines to promote heat reuse in data centers. And then from a more local standpoint, they can also play a role by controlling and influencing the location of data centers so that the possibility to actually transfer heat can be maximized. And this is it. Thank you for your time. And I leave it up, I guess, to the next speaker.
Just trying to unmute myself. I think I finally succeeded. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marco. And now we're going to move on for our second mini presentation. This is Project Westville and the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact by Telehouse. Dr. Bella Waldhauser is going to present to us an example of successful cooperation between the local authorities and data centres in which they achieved the realisation of a residential heating project in Frankfurt. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Bella is co-chair of the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact Circular Energy Working Group. So he's also going to share insights into the ongoing work of that group. So over to you, Dr. Bella.
Thank you very much, Emma. Yes, I do have a very good example from Frankfurt. And actually, I've started the discussion with the various stakeholders 4 years ago. And that tells you a little bit about how difficult it is to get something achieved. But we'll discuss that later, and I will present to you now the internet heat providing to neighborhood Westville. Westville was the initial name. Now it's called Frankie. It's in the west part of Frankfurt, as you can see. And on that slide, it looks fairly small, but it's much larger. And we'll go to the next slide, please. It's 4.5 hectares of, it was 4.5 hectares of industrial area. And you can see a lot of office buildings. Honestly speaking, in one of these buildings was my very first office after the university. And 30 years later, I took over the responsibility of Telehouse in Frankfurt, which you can see on the bottom of that slide. And now it's the project is going on, and you can see the buildings which are going to be ready phase 1 end of this year. Next slide, please. So it seems small, but you have 4 very huge buildings and 2 smaller buildings, and we are talking about a total of 1,330 flats for rent. A total of 3,000 people will live there and maybe work there, because there are 3 kindergartens, local amenities, bakery, coiffeur, a restaurant. So a lot of infrastructure. It will be a new kind of quarter there. And I'm looking forward that the first heat will be transferred to that location end of this year. Next slide, please. So that shows a little bit better how huge that is. On the right-hand side, you see the front of the Telehouse data center campus, but you don't see one of the data centers. But what you can see is that the neighborhood Frankie is just next door. It's just across the street, and that makes it easier. First of all, it's next door, and it's a brand new construction. So actually, we are talking about 3 stakeholders, which is Instone Real Estate. This is the business, this is a developer of that construction. Minova, our incumbent energy supplier and heat supplier, and obviously Telehouse as the data center. And why only a minimum of 60% of the necessary heat provided by Telehouse? This is very simple, because as mentioned earlier, we started the discussion 4 years ago. And we've signed the contract, by the way, in March 2021. That was before the war in Ukraine. Gas was cheap at that point in time. That means heat produced by gas was cheap. And the developer Instone insisted in having a competitive pricing. So it's not only about sustainability, it's also about being commercially attractive. And therefore, Minova decided to connect the whole real estate to their district heating system and put in only 2 large heat pumps. And I will come to the number of necessary heat pumps a little bit later. But at the end of the day, we will save a minimum of 400 tons CO2 per annum. Next slide, please. So the contract itself is for 15 years. And yes, we are providing the heat free of charge. The issue at the moment is that our customers are using air-cooled servers, which means the waste heat temperature is around 30% Celsius. And the temperature necessary for all the flats goes up to 30 degrees Celsius, because they don't need that for heating only, but also for warm water, and therefore they need up to 70 degrees Celsius. The heating load is maximum 3 megawatt, maybe a little bit more. But this is only in winter time when it's very, very cold. That means -10, -12 degrees Celsius, which we don't have very often actually in Frankfurt. So that might happen only for a few days every few years. The total amount of heat is estimated to be 4 gigawatt hours, 4,000 megawatt hours. So Mainova decided to put in 2 large heat pumps, each 320 kilowatt thermal, and you can easily make the calculation if you want to provide the total heating load, which is again only necessary every few years for a few days. Then you need 9 or 10 of these large heat pumps. They're quite expensive, and therefore Mainova decided to make that compromise and not to install everything, and start with the 2 large heat pumps only, and therefore we come at the end of the day at out of 60% of the waste heat from telehouse, and the remainder of max 40% from the district heating system. On the next slide, you can see what are the challenges. First of all parties need to be involved. All parties must really want this project. If one of the 3, and I need to add the community, the politicians, the authorities, local authorities, as a 4th party, if one of them does not want that project, then you have no chance. In that case, as mentioned, it's a local heating concept, which makes it much easier because of the very low temperature provided by a data center. And the advantage is, in that case, it's a new building. So there's no existing heating concept, no supply, and you can start from scratch. Because it's a new building, they have underfloor heating, which works at low temperatures. So if it would be only for the heating, then the temperature of 30 degrees Celsius is more or less what they need. So the upgrade to 60, 70 degrees Celsius is only necessary because of the warm water. Because on the other hand, if we would supply that to an existing district heating system, then the necessary temperature would be between 90, 100, 110, maybe 120 degrees Celsius. Just for your information, on the left-hand side, bottom side of that slide, you can see another neighborhood, which is called Friedrich-Ebert-Siedlung. And this was developed between First and Second World War. So between 1925 and 1939. And my next project is to supply the waste heat to that as well. And then you can see the challenges on the next slide. If you have not a new building, but an existing one, then you have to compete to the existing supply for heat. And you need much higher temperatures for the heating, because usually they don't have underfloor heating. So these are the real challenges at the moment. So my personal vision is that we will have more and more new district heating systems which do work at low temperatures between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius. We call them 4th generation district heating system. There should be an obligation to use the waste heat, honestly speaking, because at the moment, as just mentioned, as a real estate developer, I have no obligation at all to use it. We should incorporate not only the waste heat from data centers, but from all other kind of industries. And going forward, I would love to see more liquid cooled servers in our data centers, because then the waste heat temperature would nearly double. Instead of 30 degrees Celsius, we would have 50 to 55 degrees Celsius. So I'm coming to an end. So data centers as a game changer. I've talked about this residential quarter, Frankie, already, and all the figures on that slide. So I'm going directly to the next one, because we, as the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, are only 3 years old, founded in 2021. Of the European Data Center Association and the cloud service infrastructure providers, so EUDCA and CISPE. And we have 5 targets to achieve climate neutrality by 2030. One of them is circular energy, which is in principle heat reuse. And we are just discussing our goals, our targets for the signatories of the pact. And next slide, please. So inside our working group, we want to facilitate the reporting, which is mandatory from the EU, EED and Delegated Act. We want to standardize the definition of heat reuse ready, and promote obviously the readiness for all data centers and planning. And also we would like to define criteria for any kind of feasibility studies, especially requirements for small and medium enterprises. Next slide. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bella. That was great, and very interesting to see just how that has to be everybody has to be involved, everybody has to want it, and how it takes so long to actually get these things in place. So it sounds like early starting is the key thing, one of the key lessons from that. And we're going to move on to the third of our mini presentations. Felix is now going to present examples of community-led heating and cooling projects. And this will include a case study of successful cooperation between a data center, an Amsterdam district municipality, and a citizen energy community. So over to you, Felix.
Cheers, Emma. It's actually a great way forward, because indeed, like Dr. Waldhauser was saying, right, we need to involve everyone, because at the end of the day, and by everyone, of course, we mean the heat suppliers, we mean the SMEs, we mean the municipality, and most importantly, the citizens, because ultimately, I think that the trajectory, the political trajectory that we are seeing in the EU is particularly because we have not really included citizens as much as we could have in the past in decision making. So indeed, again, just to bring this together, that we all need to cooperate together if we hope to have a successful transition. Certainly, right. So like I said before, my name is Felix. There I am. And I work for RES Co-op. So we are the European Federation of Energy Communities. So we do advocacy work here for our members, that all of them are, as you can imagine, energy communities. So I'm not an engineer, right? I won't delve too deeply into the technological aspects of it, because we already have seen some good examples. And what I wanted to bring more to the fore is this collaboration, right? This is collaboration between citizens, municipality, and SMEs. So to that end, I will introduce a bit what an energy community is, when it appeared in EU legislation, and then essentially we'll go into the cases at hand. To make a long story short, what is an energy community? It's a bottom-up democratic legal entity, right, to give a solution to the energy crisis through renewables, right, which sounds like a lot, but what this means is essentially citizens that come together. They create a legal entity, most of the time as a cooperative, but it could also be something else. They create a legal entity so that they can become active participants in the energy market, and they can reap these benefits, right? So what is the difference between this approach and traditional market actors, for instance? Well, the first one, as I said, is non-for-profit, right? So that means that often cases is cheaper bills. This means cheaper bills for the customers. But it also means that because they still have revenues, right? They can't make any profit, but they still have revenues. So this also means that since they need to have a social and environmental logic rather than profit maximization, this means that they usually reinvest the revenues in the local community, as you can see. So this includes, for instance, renovating a kindergarten or providing free electricity to vulnerable households or households that have been victims to natural disasters. So yeah, essentially, I hope that I can bring the idea that the revenues stay at the local level, right, and they belong to the citizens because of the democratic ownership of this system. Now, the benefits, like I said before, they go back to the participants and the local community, and of course, as you can imagine, simply because of the fact that energies are in the driving seat of an energy community. Simply because of the fact that citizens are there, this also means that there is more public acceptance because there is more conversation among the citizens on most decisions, right? I mean, of course, there's a board, but yeah, essentially that's a bit of an idea of what that is. Where did that come from? In the next slide, we see that it all started because of a study actually of the University of Delft, which found that by 2050, around 50% of all citizens could be producing their own energy and satisfying 45% of our energy needs. So as a response to this, we have the inclusion of energy communities for the first time in EU legislation in 2019, right? And this is legislation. It is not for everyone, certainly, but it is definitely interesting because it's a big change, right? I mean, this is the first time that at the EU level, not only citizens are seen as consumers of energy, right, but they are giving a tool to become active participants in the energy market, like I was explaining before. So that was a major change. Did not stop there, right? In the next slide, we can see how well the member states are doing in transposing this legislation. Well, you know, as you can see, some are doing better than others. But if you want more information, you can go into the transposition tracker. There's a link down there. But it didn't stop there, right? In the next slide, we will see that the Clean Energy for All package was just the beginning of it, right? So introducing this concept of energy communities, which was mostly for power production, really exploded in the last years, right, with the Fit for 55 package. So essentially with some EU legislation. So now energy communities, the range of activities have been expanded to mobility, to offshore wind, to district heating. So indeed, this is what I will be focusing on for the rest of it. But with this, I wanted to show you that, yeah, the concept of energy communities really has come a long way from a couple of years ago to today. But without further ado, I'm sure that you're more interested about the specific examples. So specifically, right, for heating and cooling, what are the barriers and drivers? Well, like I mentioned before, it's the same as for any energy community, right? So essentially, there's the democratic ownership of the heating system that is owned by the citizens in collaboration many times with the municipality and with local SMEs. Makes sense since the SMEs can supply some of that heat, right? Such as a data center. So the SMEs can supply some of this heat and the citizens get to enjoy it and decide what to do with it, right? And the revenues. So all in all, works out quite nicely. Is very transparent. You need to be if you have to have democratic decision making. So they're very transparent on the costs, right, and on the revenues that they make. Barriers that they face, though, right? So not everything that shines is gold. There's definitely a lack of support, not as much as we would like to see, certainly, because at the end of the day, many of these are voluntary work, right? Citizens that work from 9 to 5, and then they want to have a bit of a positive influence. So they become part of an energy community, but this is hard work, right? So they don't get the support that they could. And of course, people don't think, right? Policymakers and people in general don't think that citizens are capable of these projects, right? They think, there's a lack of professionalization, but it's not like that. In Denmark, for instance, 2 of these famous windmills that we have, right, are owned by citizens. and out of the 380 district heatings that we have in Denmark, 320 or so are owned by citizens as well. So yeah, you know, like, but there's still the issue of a lack of imagination. You know, this still hasn't really entered people's minds, this possibility. And it's complex, right? I'm not going to lie. These are complex projects, as you can imagine. District heating, no easy task, right? Takes a lot of money, takes a lot of work, and takes a lot of technical knowledge. So yeah, all of these things are things that we could be doing better, and I'm sure we will in the future, certainly. Anyway, back to the specific examples. So I have two, one for the Netherlands, indeed, in the next slide, and one from Denmark. Right, so in the Danish case, which I do not know how to pronounce, Avedøre, so you'll excuse me for that. But in the Danish case, essentially, it's so much like the cases that we have seen, it uses the heat from the data center, which it then puts into the district heating grid and increases the temperature with a heat pump, right? The difference between the system and the other ones that we have seen, right, is that because it is owned by an energy community, it's owned by its consumers, which is around 4,500 people in this neighborhood. So it is owned by all of the people that consume this energy, right? This also means that it's cheaper, like I said before, not for profit. So customers have around 10% of cheaper energy bills in this particular case. And the owner of the data center, and this is particularly interesting, right? The owner of the data center, which is a company, is also a member of the energy community, right? So this means that following the one person, one vote, the operator of the data center also gets to sit in meetings of the energy community, gets to say their opinion, and they get to have a vote. So this is also very important so that citizens understand better the operator, and the operator has the social acceptance of the citizens. Beyond that, it also led to an increase in energy democracy in general, right? As you can imagine, simply because of the fact that the citizens were getting together to decide over this district heating, right? This has led to many more conversations beyond renewable energy among the citizens. So yeah, we're seeing a bit of a democratic rebirth, if we will. So that's one of the cases, which I find particularly interesting, actually. The Dutch one is similar, so we have it in the next slide, which is in Middenmeer, which is a district in Amsterdam, and I see that my time is flying away, so I'll be quick. But this is a case in Middenmeer, right, in Amsterdam, which I also not pronouncing well. And much like the other one, right, again, there's an energy community that owns the district heating. 5,000 citizens are connected to it, 7 schools, 2 churches, an SME. And on top of that, of course, this comes from a data center, right? This energy. So much like before, we saw that it was a collaboration. The district heating, right? It was a collaboration between the energy community and the data operator, who was part of the energy community. Here we see something different. Here we see that the energy community does a cooperation with the municipality and the infrastructure operator, right? So instead of all being together in the same energy community, the citizens have their energy community, and then they collaborate closely together through a different agreement with the municipality and the infrastructure operator. The result at the end is the same, right? The result is, of course, citizens get their heat, the municipality gets a bit of a say, and the infrastructure operator as well. Not as much as they would if they would be part of the energy community, of course, but it still works. So my point in this is, I hope to have shown you what energy communities are, right? The fact that they do exist for heating and cooling, and there's quite a bit of them. But beyond that as well, that no matter the structure that it has, be it an energy community that also includes SMEs in the municipality, or an energy community that then collaborates with the SMEs and with the municipality, be it what it may, the important thing is that it leads to the social acceptance, right? Through the collaboration of different stakeholders in society. So yeah, with that, I leave you some readings in case you can find the time. So yeah, there we have some resources that we hope might be useful about everything we talked about. And at the end, there's my email that I left as well. But I'll be happy to answer any questions, honestly. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Felix. That's absolutely fascinating. I love the idea of essentially literally putting power into the hands of communities. And I love the lack of imagination highlighted as one of the big barriers, which hasn't been mentioned to me before. So brilliant. Now we have got some questions coming in on the Q&A, but we're a couple of minutes behind, so I think we'll press on to our own moderated Q&A. So can I ask all our panelists to pop up visibly? So that's Nicolaus, who we haven't heard from yet, and Pauline as well. So we're all up, and then I'm going to fire some questions at you in turn, if that's all right. And other panelists, please feel free to chip in. So I'm going to start, Nicolaus, with you. So we've seen in recent years lots of public attention around data center heat reuse in different applications, you know, from residential heating to greenhouses to swimming pools. And at the EU level, both the revised Energy Efficiency Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive are introducing requirements for data centres to at least assess the feasibility of the heat reuse and asking member states to support collaborations among different stakeholders. On the other hand, lots and lots of technical, economic, regulatory barriers still remain. So my question, I finally got to it, is which measures are the European policymakers aiming to take to facilitate heat reuse from data centres in the next few years? And how can we ensure that waste heat provision is not only economically feasible, but also a carbon efficient approach, so we don't end up incentivising the wrong behaviour, for instance, requiring operators to install boilers to meet contractual thresholds for heat supply?
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and thank you, everybody. I mean, the presenters for the great examples. I mean, I dare to say, Emma, that if I had to reply to your question, we wouldn't need to have this webinar, right? I mean, everything would be working on its own. But okay. I think you said it also now during the question, the revised Energy Efficiency Directive and the Renewables Directive already put some more emphasis in the reuse of heat, of waste heat, right, in general. And at least we can say that we have done an extra step, which is with all these local heating and cooling plans and the CBAs that are now obligatory, and what will come also with the reporting scheme, specifically, of course, about data centers. Maybe next year or in 2 years, we might at least have a good idea of what's happening. Now, I mean, obviously that's not enough, and that's not what you asked for, right? I would say to what was shared, there are two things. There is one good and one challenging point, right? The good point is that nobody thinks that it cannot happen. I mean, technically, we all know how it can happen, even in large differences in temperature, etc. But the question then is, of course, why it's not happening, but also how do we, what is the market in that? And I'm afraid to say that so far there is, I mean, you know, the market hasn't been created. I mean, even I think in waste heat, we haven't really reached that moment, like literally in waste, where we put a price, or we identified the opportunity in the recycled aluminum, paper, glass, I don't know what, and suddenly a market rushed to take this opportunity. Here, I mean, I think we're still in a sense, okay, a data center raises a hand and says, I can give you that for free. And if we are lucky enough, there is someone next that says, oh, I like the idea, let me put the equipment and I'll take it, etc., etc. So obviously, I think we have to work on the direction of making that real. I mean, real in terms of putting maybe a value, or putting the incentive that will create the value to that. Now, and I'm saying also that because to what we heard, there is a second, let's say, challenge that it's difficult to tackle, that usually data centers, and especially the data centers that we are building now, are very big, are very large, are consuming land. Maybe also they're noisy, or they are not so very attractive, or whatever. And it's rare that for various reasons, real estate reasons or whatever, that they will build conveniently next to a city, for example. Usually they will be some kilometers, maybe even a lot of kilometers away. And of course, here we have to be creative in discovering these sweet spots on how we can move a bit geographically the decision to where to locate, or how we can ask people to accept a data center closer to them in exchange of, for example, better energy bills, etc., etc. Now, as you know, what we started with the reporting scheme, for example, for data center was, we always said that was the first step in a long process to look at the sustainability of data centers, right? And that means that in the next months, if not, I mean, not even years, in the next months, we're going to continue this discussion. And of course, one thing that's going to be on the table is the waste heat reuse. So in that sense, one thing we want to explore is exactly how, without being too disruptive, of course, or intrusive, right? I mean, to all types of stakeholders, we can create this exactly. I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I know I don't give you something specific, but what I'm saying is what you're asking, to find out what are the enablers exactly to create this situation or this market where the uptake of heat will be more obvious, more feasible, more technically possible. The positive in that evasive reply I give you is that I don't also exclude anything, right? We're open to hear the best ideas out there and see how it can happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nikolaos. Would anyone else of our speakers like to chip in on that, or shall I move on to Pauline, for whom I have a question?
I would love to comment. Yes, we have had exactly this discussion, Nikolaos, this morning in our working group. Shall we build one 300 megawatt data center or 30 times 10 megawatt? But at the moment, to be honest, even if we build 30 10 megawatt data centers, we don't have the district heating systems in every city that the community can really offtake that waste heat. So I think we can discuss a lot about the waste heat usage from data centers, but we need to also discuss about the district heating systems and modern type district heating systems, fourth generation as well, because otherwise we will build small data centers everywhere. And even in 10, 15, 20 years, nobody will offtake the waste heat. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Right, Pauline, so question for Pauline Luca. The heating sector has also been targeted with new ambitious requirements to decarbonize fully by 2030. And data center heat could provide an almost free source of that carbon-free heat. However, it's often said the heat from data centers has very low calorific value. So is the heating sector interested in non-conventional, low calorific sources of heat? And how can we ensure that carbon accounting is beneficial for both heat sources and for the off-takers?
Thanks a lot, Emma, and very, very happy to hear that the data center sector is keen on having more district heating infrastructure. That's good news, that's helpful. And to start answering your question, yes, the district heating sector is interested in low-grade heat sources, such as data center. It's not the only one. We see that there are many studies now that are pinpointing this huge potential, so of data centers and other types of low-grade heat. And for us, it's very important. Just to give you to size the challenge, we still, as a district heating sector, have around 60% of fossil fuels to phase out. And we are going towards a total phase out, just like the rest of the economy. And so this is a very big challenge. And now we also have the adequate policy framework. As you mentioned, we already have a pathway that is set out in the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's called the Efficient District Heating and Cooling Definition. And this will drive our sector towards carbon neutrality, but already from 2030 for refurbished district heating and new district heating, there will no longer be the possibility of adding fossil fuels. So the path is very clear, and we need everything we at our disposal to make this happen. And not only it will enable the decarbonization of our sector, but it's also provided that the right business model are in place. It's a commercial win-win also with the data center sector. I think the colleagues, Marco in particular, has shown that from the technical perspective, we have what it takes. We have heat pumps to upgrade this heat to more usable temperature, depending on the needs of networks. We have examples where data centers are providing their heat to actually networks that are working under higher temperature conditions, so above 100 degrees. It's the case in Sweden, Finland, or probably also in Denmark, as Felix was pointing an example from Denmark. So, for instance, we have very concretely the ESPO network in Finland that is planning on using 40% of heat from hyperscale data center to be carbon neutral by 2030, so quite shortly. And for that, I think the colleagues also have set the important aspect that should be prevalent. So, of course, the lowering of the temperature in district heating grids, so the move towards 4th and 5th generation of district heating. And I think something that the colleagues perhaps from data center can touch upon, but there will also be an increase in temperature of the data center heat. So sort of to meet in the middle or so. And another important aspect is the renovation of buildings. So we know that we need to put a lot more on buildings renovation. So be it on the thermal envelope, but also on the heating system. I'm mentioning what's inside the building. I think the colleague from the Commission also mentioned this aspect. So all of this will, of course, drive the use of this low-grade heat. And in terms of policy and incentive, we have a good basis to address the other part of the question. So we have this regulatory framework with Fit for 55, with a really big recognition in the Renewable Energy Directive and Energy Efficiency Directive of the value of this waste heat, in particular from data center with very specific requirements. And this heat is recognized as contributing towards renewable and wasted targets for buildings, industry, heating and cooling, and of course, district heating. So I think what's important is to make sure that this heat it remains and is considered as carbon-free, that there is no carbon content attached to it, as it is actually in district heating, for instance, displacing the fossil fuels and contributing also to energy efficiency. And in the near future, in any case, data center, but also other sources will be carbon neutral. So it will be even more straightforward to prove that this heat that is recovered and used is carbon neutral. So for instance, for the use of guarantees of origin. But in the meantime, what's for sure is that it's crucial that the status of this heat is not questioned at EU level, but in particular also at national level, as it could as it was the case, for instance, in Denmark, where it was taxed. So this is something that we should really avoid to not disincentivize, but to incentivize the use of this heat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I hadn't realized there were even disincentives floating around. So thank you so much, Pauline. Right, we'll whiz on to the next question, which is for Felix. I think Felix might pick up the beginning of this, and Dr. Bella may pick up the end of this question. Some of the challenges relate to the lack of standardized contractual clauses and harmonized frameworks across EU member states. Yet there are some very concrete examples of successful cooperation, for instance, Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt. So the question itself is, what were the main challenges and lessons to learn from those successful examples? What are the crucial aspects to take into account to ensure that projects are feasible from both an economic and a technical perspective?
Right, that's a tricky one. Boyong. Right, so the challenges, I mean, I can only speak, of course, for the projects that were, for the district heating that was done by energy communities, right?
Sure.
But I mentioned some of the challenges before already, right? So essentially, if we can summarize them into two, I would think it's financing, right? Huge issue. At the end of the day, there's not enough public funds, clearly, for the size of the transition, right? Nor is it reasonable to expect them to be. So we need private financing, and private financing is a bit trickier for energy communities, for instance, because it's more difficult for them to get a loan from the bank, right? So something to overcome this could be de-risking the investments, for instance, like they do in the Netherlands, right? So in the Netherlands and in Denmark, this is one of the things that they have focused on in de-risking this access for energy communities, for citizens to bank loans, right? And I don't mean individual citizens, of course, I mean the legal entity that is an energy community. So that has made it easier for the financing. But then, of course, there's a technical aspect as well, right? Like I said before, it's not the same a PV project by an energy community, which is fairly straightforward, than it is to build a 9-kilometer district heating network. They still do it, right? Because at the end of the day, they still hire people. It's obviously not me that is installing the district heating, God forbid. But they hire people, right? Of course, they hire technical experts to then like carry out this work, technical partners. So the skills is, I guess, something else that we could focus on, right? Which goes into renovations, what Pauline was mentioning before, is more or less the same issue, right? We need to have enough people that know how to do this, which at the moment I'm not entirely sure that we have. And third, I said two, but third, I guess, is also the capacity of the municipalities, right? So I saw a couple questions on the Q&A that were along the lines of, well, where do we put the data center, right? Like Dr. Waldhauser was saying, where do we put the data center? At the end of the day, it is my belief that yes, this will need to be better organized, right? At the local level, we can't just install whatever we want wherever we want it, because clearly we are moving to a bit of a more interconnected energy system, decentralized but interconnected at the local level. So yeah, I mean, if you're gonna open the ground to put new internet cables, look into the possibility of district heating. If you're looking into the possibility of district heating, right, look as well into what is in your backyards. Look at the data centers that are around you. Look at the geothermal energy, for instance, that you could have, but in this case, data centers. And that's a very long answer, but yeah, that's it.
Very comprehensive. Thank you very much. Dr. Bella, would you like to come in on this? And then I've got a question for you.
Yes, thanks, Emma. To be honest, I don't think that the contractual framework is the biggest issue. As mentioned in my short presentation, if not every stakeholder is working towards the same goal, then it doesn't work. So we need the real estate developers or real estate owners together with the heating system supplier and the authorities, communities together with the data centers, working all of them close together in order to make it happen. So this comes much before the contractual clauses. The second topic is that we need to find each other, actually. And that's the reason why we are working on a matchmaking tool. So that if somebody needs heat from a data center, then they can look in that matchmaking tool and find a data center nearby, which accommodates the need. So, and if these two main points are resolved, then we can come to the question of contractual clauses, frameworks, whatsoever. And by the way, I'm not sure how this is in other countries, but the tax authorities are not always very friendly towards our solution. So the latest information I have is that I need to pay tax because I give the waste heat for free for neighborhood Westwood Frankie. So that doesn't help a sustainable approach.
Thank you. Yes, I can see, I can sense the irritation. Yes, don't put extra barriers and disincentives, as also Pauline pointed out. So one for you specifically, Dr. Bella, challenges are not technology related, but rather conditional on the availability of the infrastructures for the transport of heat, as well as its profitability. However, the law requires data centers to assess the feasibility of heat reuse. So what is the industry doing to meet these new regulatory requirements, and what are the most important obstacles to the reutilization of waste heat? How is the data center sector addressing the challenges of collaborating with regulatory bodies, and what specific initiatives or strategies are being employed to foster this collaboration?
Thank you very much, Emma. And the answer is very easy, because EUDCA is meeting up with Euroheat and Power, and Pauline is here as their policy director, in order to find exactly this very short way to collaborate together. But Pauline raised her hand. I think she wanted to comment to the previous question.
Yes, that's a perfect point to bring that up. Thank you, Pauline.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to react to Felix and Bella's comment on this idea of matchmaking and the importance of like making plans. And the good news is that we actually do have some novelty on that stemming from the Fit for 55 package. It's not perfect, but it states that it's in the Energy Efficiency Directive that municipalities above 45,000 inhabitants will have to make plans. And I think it's actually addressing one of the Q&A questions. So this will help to match the demand and the supply. And this will also force cities to look on what's available locally, be it the data center or the geothermal, as Felix mentioned, whatever is there locally, and how to connect it to the building. So what kind of gap we have in terms of infrastructure. So the implementation of this plan is going to be key. And probably just also linking with what was said, we will need to help cities with that, because these plans require resources, so people and money to be developed. So this is going to be a big challenge, but I see this as a positive development for tapping into these resources that are there, such as data center heat.
Brilliant, thank you.
Let me come back to your question, Emma. So I did
perfect.
Let me start with what we as an industry can do. First of all, we have incumbent existing data centers which are not really waste heat ready. So as mentioned in my presentation, we are looking forward to a feasibility study from an economical point of view, but also a sustainability point of view, whether it does make sense to convert these incumbent data centers into waste heat ready data centers. But for sure, all new data centers as of year YX, I don't know, should be waste heat ready, so that it's fairly easy whenever we have off-takers for that waste heat, then it should be very easy and straightforward to provide that waste heat to whoever is off-taking that. And just two examples, if you have a very distributed cooling system in your data center, then you need to collect all the waste heat from the various parts of that distributed cooling system, which is not easy. Or if you have adiabatic cooling, where you are working with a lot of air, then it's more difficult to get the heat out of the system compared to whenever you are working with cold and water pipes, where you can then from the back pipes take off the heat with heat exchangers. So there are a lot of technical topics which we need to discuss. And last but not least, the communities, the cities, they need to invest a lot of money into the respective district heating systems. And I'm just in discussion with Minova, our incumbent energy supplier, that we will connect the whole telehouse campus to their district heating system. But this is a project which easily takes 3 or 4 years. They need place for 1 or 2 really large heat pumps, so much larger than the heat pumps I've talked about regarding neighborhood Westwell Frankie. And they need a lot of power. So such a big heat pump uses 4, 5, 6 megawatt of power in order to increase the temperature. So there are a lot of topics we need to discuss before we can really make it happen.
Thank you so much. Right, we're short on time, so I've got 2 more questions that we'll field as quickly as possible. The next one is Marco, but this looks like a shorter question. I know actually between us, the panel has done a pretty good job of answering this question. How can governments actively contribute to enhancing the uptake of heat from data centres and overcome the main technical, economic and regulatory barriers? And which barriers have shown to be the most significant, hindering the reuse of excess heat? What specific actions or policies should be prioritised to improve heat reuse from data centres and reap its benefits as a carbon-free source of heat?
Okay, so that's like quite a comprehensive indeed question. Like I was starting to answer it in my presentation. I would actually maybe start from the barriers. So we have actually been discussing, and the other panelists have actually been repeating or going more in depth on the technical barriers, and there are quite a lot of technical barriers, but I would like not maybe to focus on those because this is like actually like a bit more distant from the regulation. On top of those, I would like to flag that there are uncertainties in terms of lack of specificities and the regulatory framework on the integration process that hampers the synergies between data centers and energy grids. And there are also economic uncertainties or barriers in that are connected, like first, like to potential macroeconomic instability, like uncertainty of the investment, and concerns, like basically about the economic feasibility of data centers. On top of like the technical barriers that were mentioned, like which are quite much large. So the role that some of those barriers can actually be addressed like, from a technical standpoint, others are more like say up for regulation. I think that like regulatory authorities indeed can actually like play their game on different levels. The first one is actually to establish policies and guidelines to actually promote heat reuse and in a sense create a market. And this passes from also recognition of waste heat as an energy source for potential off-takers. And it can also be connected to another point, which is related to incentives. Like there could actually be like several types of incentives, including the ones like for potential off-takers to increase their numbers. On the supply side, to create a market, like what I was quickly covering, like from our presentation, is the fact that a target could actually be thought about the energy reuse, so that like this would actually be introduced as a potentially like up to being an obligation to basically like generate a supply that is like the other element to create a market together with the demand. And to make this feasible, indeed, like there are technical issues that need to be assessed. So, like in this sense, authorities could also be thinking about like subsidies and support, like on the enabling technologies, like connected to heat storage or heat pump projects or others. So this is, I think, like a little bit like at a general level. Then there is a lower level, let's say, like looking to the local authorities. To summarize and not to go too long, I think that one key element that in which they can play is actually like to coordinate activities so that like the urban or local design and urban design is actually taking into account like the constraints that are there, like when it comes to heat reuse and when it comes like to the planning of data centers and like the buildings that actually need to use this heat to basically like find solutions. And this is like not an easy task at all to accomplish. Then maybe one last element to mention is that something that can be done at policy level on top of hard or soft action is also like to continue promote the dialogue, like and to basically promote a discussion between the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, because the challenge is multifaceted, and discussion and interaction between all the stakeholders actually is required to address all the relevant points.
Thank you so much, Marco. And I think we've got just about 10 minutes left. So I think it's worth us having a look at some great questions in the chat, but also I've got a final question for all speakers, as you know, if you'd like to answer this, but feel free to pick up any of the questions in the chat, because there's some really interesting ones that I think some of us will have the answer to. Some of us won't have none of us will have the answer to a couple of them, I think. But so the question for you initially is, which investments or actions are key in the next couple of years to make the uptake of heat successful, and how can this be financed? So that's our final poser, but do feel free to pick up any of the questions in the Q&A, because I do think they're pertinent to this particular question as well. Who would like to go first? Felix.
Hey everyone. I suppose from EU legislation perspective, I suppose that the best thing that can happen in the near future is maybe an update of the strategy in heating and cooling. There used to be one that dates back to 2016, so it's fairly old. So I guess that could be a help, right? And including waste heat from data centers in that strategy. So yeah, maybe an update of the 2016 heating and cooling strategy.
Excellent, thank you. Marco, you're on. Would you like to come in on any of these? I notice you're off mute.
Well, I would maybe like to come to answer like to your question, like when it comes to investment or actions. I mean, maybe an observation. I would like to first to start with an observation that in our study we've actually been taking a look to a number of research and industry and more industrial like projects and initiatives, and we've been seeing like a steady increase of the number of those projects between 2015 and 2022. And we've also been discussing basically with the members of the ecosystem, like, and the participants to those projects about like their outlook on those projects. And 60% of the respondents that we interviewed like actually confirm that the technological feasibility like to be viable, but only 20% believe that that heat reuse like from a data center is feasible from an economic perspective. So if there is a need to actually like to create a market, I think that investments could actually go in this direction to actually provide some subsidies and to basically like create a critical mass that could actually like basically like lead to the further expansion of heat reuse. So some potential tools like could actually be heat feed-in tariffs for heat grids or purchase obligations for heat grid operators or heat users. And like maybe another point could actually be facilitation of licensing or waivers of taxes for high waste heat utilizations. So like those could actually be measures that investment that could actually be valuable ones, because they would not only like create a direct impact, but they would actually potentially create a snowball effect.
Excellent. Yeah, waivers of tax, I think, on something you're giving away for free would be very nice, wouldn't it? Yes, I agree with that. Excellent, Dr. Bella.
Yes, Emma, I think I mentioned that already, but we do need more low temperature district heating systems. And we need more households, offices, buildings, whatsoever, connected to these heating systems. Because at the moment, if I'm looking throughout Europe, maybe Sweden is a good example, or maybe Denmark, but in all other countries, there are not so many buildings connected to district heating systems, which means we have a very low number of off-takers, and we need much, much more, and preferably low temperature district heating systems. Then the delta temperature is low to the existing data centers, and it will go to zero when we use more liquid cooled servers.
Brilliant, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment? Oh, Pauline.
Yeah, just to pick up on the comments that were made by Marco and then by Bella. I think in terms of what you saw in the study, the economic perspective that seemed to be a bit more put in doubt by stakeholders, what we heard from the ground is at the time being you still need to use heat pumps to upgrade the heat. And some problems have been identified by operators in project involving waste heat, but not only, for instance, also geothermal, as they're also using heat pumps, which is the electricity taxation and tariffs, and also the grid connection fees that are oftentimes not very favorable to be used, and this is making the business case a little worse. So agreed with Bella that of course we need to have lower temperature district heating, but that's also from the climatic perspective not always feasible, because where you have very cold climate, you will need a network that have a bit higher temperature. So and we see that it's technically possible. And also to pick up perhaps on the investment question, well, I think there is no doubt, and there is kind of a consensus around this table around the investment in infrastructure. At EU level or even at national level, there are many different funds that are available for various purposes, for instance, modernization or innovation funds connected to ETS, or regional funds. But it's a little bit of a complicated pictures to navigate, be it for operators or cities or communities even. So we are in need a bit of streamlining and simplification. And why not also, if we start feeling this new heating and cooling strategy with concrete proposal to have the possibility of combining these funds also from the various levels. We know that there is money, but public money, but we also need to leverage this investment to attract private investment. So yeah, if I may formulate one ask for what's coming with the next legislative mandate.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to make a final, very quick comment? We've got, I think, 2 minutes left. Nicolaus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just, I mean, because the rest of the panel, I think, covered all the points sufficiently. So, I mean, I struggle to find something to add, but I would say one, I mean, in a bit of a light mood, one problem with heat is that it's invisible. So, I mean, you know, it's very difficult to picture what it means to waste heat and what it means to reuse the heat. So I think one of the real challenge here is to make heat visible, so that people understand what is the gain of investing and reusing heat. Let's not forget, after all, that we're talking about cost, infrastructure, etc. But I mean, even the competition is there. I mean, why someone would ask, from all the, I suppose, the experts that are connected, why reuse heat and not directly use the electricity, you know, to produce new heat, for example, in a I don't know, heat pumps or electric heaters in the houses. So it doesn't matter here to say what is more efficient. I'm just trying to say that it's not one solution, and we have to make a convincing case here. The local heating and cooling plants and all these new measures, I hope, will help in showing the potential and the economic also opportunity there. And hopefully in the next months and couple of years, we will make the discussions that are necessary and try to push a bit with measures on how. I don't know what it will be, if it will be heat reuse ready data centers or heat reuse ready district heating. I mean, or both, you know, I mean, depending on where you sit, you might be seeing what the other one is doing.
Indeed.
Hopefully, yeah, we will bridge these two worlds and try to, of course, to make it happen from our side.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I think we've seen the pros, lots of willing participants, lots of political will. We know that this is possible, and we've got lots of successful case studies. We've seen the barriers, financing, skills, the fact that heat's intangible, the fact that, you know, there's a lack of imagination around it, the fact of, you know, repurposing legacy sites, and the odd disincentive. And then we've also learned how we need to remove those barriers, that we're going to need legislation, we're going to need incentives, we're going to need targets, we're going to need investment, we're going to need obligations on the off-taker as well as the provider. So it is a journey. And I think that's the, you know, and it will change as the technology within data centers for cooling changes. So that's been certainly fascinating for me. I'd just like to thank our wonderful panelists, Nikolaos, Marco, Bella, Pauline, and Felix. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. And I believe that we will be circulating the slides afterwards, so if anybody would like those. So thank you very much for attending, and thanks again to our panelists. Now close the webinar. Thank you.